Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. On this video, I'm going to show you guys how I prep my models and export out of Nomad Sculpt. I typically render my projects outside of Nomad, so I specifically use Redshift render in Cinema 4D, but I know a lot of people like to do the same thing and render, whether that's in Blender or whatever other program you use, or if you simply want to export your models out for other purposes. This is how I personally do it. So the first thing I do is I clean up my scene, and all that means is if you have anything that's not validated or that's inside of like a radial, then you would want to validate that. It's not necessarily something you have to do. I have exported some of my radials out and it still comes in just fine into my into Cinema. So, you know, you probably could get away with that, but the reason I do it is because I just like to simplify my scene timeline and just have individual objects. So again, that's just personal preference. But besides that, I go object by object, and I'm going to decimate that object. So I'm going to decimate each object, and to decimate, you just want to go up here into your mesh settings, where you have your multi-resolution settings, and under the miscellaneous, I believe, you have an option to decimate your model. And what decimating does is it just reduces the number of polygons in your mesh so that you have a much more workable, cleaner scene. And you can play with the settings here. I have it set to 50%, and I want to preserve my painting at 100%. So you just, again, want to play with some of those settings. I also like to preserve my borders. So if I have any sharp edges, I don't want to lose that. And I want to make sure that when Nomad starts to decimate the model, it will keep as much detail as possible. So right now, as you can see, these cherries, for example, have 66.6 thousand polygons. And that's probably overkill. So I'm just going to start to decimate, and I like to zoom in so that I could look at what the model's looking like and make sure I'm not losing too much detail. So once again, I'm just going to decimate. Everything's still looking fine. I think about there is where it starts to look a little bit rough, so I don't want to go any lower than that. But that's still a lot, a huge difference from the 66.6 thousand. Now we're only at 8,352. And I can get with that, so I'm going to keep that. After I decimate, right below that, I have the option to unwrap my mesh, to unfold it and give myself some UVs. So Nomad does have the option to do automatic UVs. However, you don't really have much control of it, and it only truly works if your mesh is under 100,000 vertices, which is another reason why decimating is good. But if I want to export this out, and let's say you wanted to add or play with the textures in a different software, then you would need to UV unwrap this. So I'm just going to go ahead and unwrap that. It's going to calculate it, and then you're going to see your UV map appear behind you. Again, this is not necessarily, I guess, proper looking UVs, but it works for what I need it for. It's still gonna, it's not gonna mess up my textures or my renders. So I have pretty basic stuff going on here, so that's fine with me. So after you unwrap, if you're gonna keep the painting that you've created in Nomad, if you're not gonna change this, then you wanna bake those textures on. And then to do that, I'm gonna just, right underneath that, I'm just gonna bake the texture from itself. Oh, and then my Nomad crashed, so that's fun. This is why you want to save. So I'm going to open it again, save. I'm not sure where it last saved. Okay, so it didn't keep any of the UVs. So let's go back to my cherries. We're going to decimate it again, back to the 8,000. I'm going to unwrap that. And then before I bake, for the sake of it not crashing again, I'm going to save. And it's probably crashing because of the memory space here, and my scene is very big. I have almost 7 million polygons, which is extremely overkill, but that's why I decimate. I'm gonna use the I'm gonna use the wire mesh tool so that I could see which one of my meshes is the most dense, and so I could see that by just seeing which one looks darkest. And right now I believe it's our swirls here, so I'm going to decimate that one because that might be what's causing my scene to crash. And yeah, this one has almost 4 million polygons in their vertices, which again is completely overkill. So I'm going to hit preserve borders again, and I'm just going to decimate, and it will take longer depending on the iPad you have and on how big your mesh here is or your scene is in general. So my goal is always to get it definitely under 100,000 so that I could UV unwrap, but really as low as I can without losing too much detail. So this one got to 26 before I didn't really like the way it was looking, so I'm just going to leave it there, and then I'm going to unwrap that. And then again, it takes longer the heavier your mesh is or your scene is. So it'll kind of calculate, and then I'm just gonna save. I recommend you save after each step because again, Nomad might crash and then you're just gonna have to go back and start all over. Okay, so I have that done, and now my scene is much more reasonable at 3.48 million. Still too much, but better than 6. Okay, so I've, okay. And I'm going to do this in order so that I don't get confused. So typically I'll just go down my scene and do the same thing for every single one. So my first thing up here is these drapes. They have 196,000 polygons, so I'm just going to decimate again. I'm just going to keep going, like I said, until I start to not like the way my shape is looking. I'm fine with that. That's 12,000. I'm going to unwrap that. And then I'm going to save. And then I'm also going to, so I'm going to bake that. Again, I'm just going to go in order here. So my drapes, I decimated, I unwrapped. And again, if you want to make sure whether you unwrapped or didn't, you can hit the little inspect shortcut here, and it'll show you the UV map. So I can click on each of these guys and I could see what's UV'd and what isn't. So on my drapes, I'm gonna now bake. And what baking means is that it's going to calculate whatever information you have painted on that mesh, and it's going to permanently pretty much seal it onto the mesh. If you export this out, it's going to bring those textures in with you. Like it's going to be part of the mesh. So you don't have to worry about losing the colors you've created. Okay, so we have our drapes here. The next thing is the cake. So now that I've finished sculpting, I can validate that cylinder. And I'm going to decimate it. I'm going to get real close. Decimate. This one could probably go pretty low because it's such a simple shape. And then you could use your wireframe tool also to kind of see what's going on. Fine with that. I'm going to unwrap it and I'm going to bake the texture. Again, I'm going to save. And then I'm going to go down to my tubes. Same thing. They're at 113,000, which again, probably very unnecessary. So we're going to decimate. And then I'm going to unwrap. And then I'm going to bake. So this is why I don't really worry or think about my the amount of polygons in my scene as I'm sculpting, and I just kind of subdivide as needed, and because I know that I'm going to eventually clean this scene up. It's not going to stay at 7 million polygons. And obviously you could do this as you go, especially if you have a device that maybe can't handle so much. Then I would recommend that as you're sculpting and you're done with something, that you decimate. And that way your scene stays as manageable as possible. But okay, so we did the tubes, and then our plate, same thing, decimate. Wireframe that. And as you can see, because I have preserved borders on, my very smooth edges are being kept, and no matter how low I go, they're always gonna have the most polygons concentrated in that area because I have that setting checked on. Wrap that and bake it. So I'm just gonna go through and do this for my entire scene, and then when I'm done, I'll come back and show you guys the next step. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done that decimated, UV'd and baked all of my objects. So once you're done with that, all you wanna do is go into your project settings and scroll down to your export. I personally export everything out as an OBJ because Cinema is compatible with OBJ. You're gonna have to probably look and see what program you're using and what are the files that you can import. And then you can either just directly export all, you can do visible, or you can only export whatever you select in your scene. I'm just gonna do all because I wanna export the entire scene. And I typically check my vertex colors, Nomad uses vertex painting. So when you're painting on it, you're painting directly on the vertices. So that's gonna bring in the color information that you've painted on. It also has the option to bring textures in, which is pretty neat because that's going to give you, let me see if I can find it here. It's gonna give you this texture map for each of your objects. So if for some reason the program that you use doesn't support vertex painting information, like it doesn't import it, that's okay, because if you export out those texture maps, you're also going to have the option to just plug those directly into your color or albedo. So keep that in mind. I usually just export both just to have, and then you just want to hit export OBJ, and then it's going to ask where you want to save it. I'm just going to save that out into my iCloud drive. So I'm just gonna make it's gonna give you a folder, and that's gonna contain your OBJ, your material file, and all of the texture maps that you're exporting. So you can save that wherever you want. I just kind of throw it into my iCloud drive because I can go on iCloud.com and download it directly. And then what I like to do, which is just, again, personal, is I could just compress it, and that way it'll give me a zipped file, which is much easier to download. And, whether you're putting this on like an external hard drive, a Google Drive, it's just easier to manage because it's a lot smaller than this folder. So that is all, guys. That is how you prep your model and export out of Nomad for whatever reason you're doing it, whether it's to render outside, animate, or just to share the file if you 3D print, etc. But I hope this video was useful. As always, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave them down below. Thank you for watching, and happy sculpting.